Well, this has certainly been an odd year, hasn't it? Whilst we've all faced challenges this year, it's easy to forget that it hasn't all been bad. In fact, the video game industry may have just had one of its best years yet. From Animal Crossing taking the world by storm as lockdowns begun, to the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X finally seeing the light of day. This has been a bumpy year for the industry, full of some truly awesome surprises. The launch of a new console generation was always going to be exciting, and whilst said launch had to be somewhat muted compared to previous efforts, the slow build-up we received all year was nevertheless a thrilling ride. Elsewhere, Nintendo had a quieter year in terms of releases, but that was hardly an issue for them considering the juggernaut Animal Crossing became and the nostalgia-feeding power of Super Mario's 35th anniversary celebrations. So there's been ups and there's been downs, the supply issues that plagued not only the new generation launches but Nintendo as well certainly spring to mind. But at the end of the day, through all the talk of teraflops and terabytes, all the arguing over who has the best shiny new box, it's the games that matter most, and boy oh boy did they shine through this year. So, join me as I go through my top 5 games of the absolute shambles that was 2020. Every now and then a game will come along and completely take you by surprise. You go in with absolutely no expectations and come away amazed. Astros Playroom was that game for me. A free game that comes pre-installed on every PS5, Astros Playroom is an adorable little platforming adventure that acts as a love letter to the PlayStation's history. It's filled to the brim with nostalgia-inducing Easter eggs and is just a sheer blast to play. The puzzle mechanics at play are simple but effective, and each of the power-ups Astro encounters are used in such a way that it never gets tiring using each one again. Every level you can tell has been carefully crafted to squeeze as much out of an idea as possible, but without anything feeling like a drag. And the way the DualSense controller has been used is incredible. Astro's Playroom essentially acts as a tech demo for the controller. It accomplishes that task perfectly, succeeding in getting me excited about how it might feel in other games, but it also did so whilst being an effective game itself, something most of this nature don't really pull off. It may sound odd given the nature of the upcoming games on my list and just how much detail I've gone into each of them, but I don't actually want to say too much more on Astro, as I believe it's a game best experienced with as little information going in as possible. If you've already played it, then you'll know just how charming it is, with its killer soundtrack and brilliant level design. But if you've yet to play it at all, let's just say you're in for one hell of a treat. "2020 was the year several long-anticipated games finally saw their release, and perhaps none was as anticipated as The Last of Us Part 2. Coming 7 years after the release of the original game, this had a lot of expectations riding on it. As someone who only played the first game mere months before this release, I didn't have the same level of expectations as those many fans for whom this was perhaps the most important event of the year. Still, I'd been swept up in the marketing hype that had built up this game for years on end. The first trailer back at E3 2016 had me intrigued at the prospect of this harrowing story, and every news article and gameplay snippet since saw the game increasingly sink its hooks into me. Cut to release day and it took mere moments for me to understand why so many were so invested in this story. The connection between Ellie and Joel is something to behold, and the way it's built upon through flashbacks scattered throughout the game is a brilliant decision. They offer a brief reprieve from the intense darkness of the rest of the story, gifting us some truly light-hearted, joyful moments that are all too rare in games like this. The story as a whole can be called divisive at best, but I personally loved its tale of morality and revenge. Perhaps this is because I don't have the attachment so many do to the first game, but I appreciate the story they're trying to tell, and I believe the decisions made in order to tell that story serve the game well and prevent it from just being a rehash of the first installment. It's easy to focus solely on the story in titles such as these, but they are games after all, and you'd rather want the gameplay to soar. Luckily, it does. The action is fast-paced and intense, and all your movements flow smoothly. You have the option to tackle each mission as you like, Be that taking the stealthy approach, slowly making your way through levels, disposing of enemies with ninja-like precision as you go, or simply raging in head first, destroying all who stand in your way. How you play the game is your choice, and it's a brilliant choice to have. I personally always favour stealth in games such as these, just because whenever I'm faced with a horde of enemies and a gun, I tend to end up wildly firing all over the place in a blind panic. The Last of Us 2 provides you with plenty of options, and it makes the game all the more accessible for it. This is a game that sucked me in completely. I was truly invested in the stories of Ellie and Abby, and the way they were interwoven was a stroke of genius. Placing you in the shoes of your enemy is a decision most games wouldn't make, but this one does it near flawlessly. If there's one complaint I do have, it's that the game stretches on for just a bit too long. I can certainly understand why a lot of people don't enjoy playing half the game as Abby, but I genuinely believe it enriches the narrative. However, it does still drag on. The last portion of the game feels somewhat unnecessary, and could all have been accomplished in the final confrontation in Seattle. Nevertheless, The Last of Us Part 2 is a masterclass in open world game design and storytelling, and truly deserves its place as one of the finest games of the generation. Animal Crossing New Horizons provided a lifeline for millions of players all over as the full effects of the coronavirus pandemic started to sink in and lockdowns started occurring the world over. Presenting a virtual getaway to a peaceful desert island resort, New Horizons gave players the tools they needed to start their own island home, and wow, did they run with them. It's hard to say whether the game would have been this much of a success had the pandemic not hit, but you can't deny that the building blocks were all in place. Escapism is one of the main draws of video games, and escaping to an island you can mould in any way you wish when you can't even leave the house might just be the best example of this. Animal Crossing is by no means a complex game. You spend a couple hours each day harvesting fruit, catching bugs and reeling in fish, and use the money earned from these activities to build up your island. What's great about the game is that you're free to focus on whatever you want. After a few early tasks that need to be done, what comes next is entirely up to you. Want to focus on earning money to pay off your house? Go for it. Wish to grow the appeal of your island through decorating instead? Have at it. New Horizons gives you a simple set of tools and says go. It's your choice. The game has its flaws for sure. It's certainly not the type of game you can spend hours at a time playing. For some this will be off-putting, but it's often quite nice to simply pop back in for an hour or two each day to keep your island ticking along. However, the game can also feel very repetitive. There's only a finite number of activities that help you earn bells, the game's currency, and you may soon find yourself tiring of all the puns. Nintendo has remedied this somewhat with updates throughout the year for different holidays and celebrations, but you can often accomplish all these have to offer in a single sitting, and it does beg the question as to whether the events held this year will be exactly as the same as those in years to come. Overall though, Animal Crossing New Horizons is, simply put, a joyful game. Whether you're getting to know a colourful cast of adorable islanders, building the perfect home, or just enjoying all the serenity an island escape has to offer, this game offers the perfect antidote to what are some extremely trying times. Back in 2018, SpiderMan for the PS4 was my game of the year. No mean feat in the year that also saw the release of Smash Bros Ultimate, but Insomniac Games just delivered something truly incredible with that first installment. Spider-Man Miles Morales takes everything that was great about the original game and expands upon it with, in my opinion, an even more interesting character. Peter Parker shall forever be one of the classics, but Miles just seems like the exact right character for our times. The game shines a light on cultures and people rarely given their due diligence, and as a result feels incredibly fresh and exciting. One of my favourite moments of the entire game was walking through a street party fairly early on, not as Spider-Man, but as Miles, engaging with the community. Although it's set at Christmas, snow falling fast, the glowing orange tones used in the game strengthened that feeling of warmth, and in that moment, everything just feels incredibly homely. It's hard to describe, but the feeling is clear when playing the game. Speaking of, the vast array of abilities Miles possesses makes him wholly unique to the original Spider-Man, which again makes this game feel so fresh. His venom powers are exciting and genuinely fun to use, and make you really think about how you approach enemy encounters. There's a focus on stealth in the game that I thought was rather underutilised. Miles has an ability that turns him invisible for a period of time, but there is seldom reason to actually use it. Simply sticking to walls and ceilings tends to keep you well out the way of enemy detection. Obviously, this is a smaller game than the original Spider-Man, however that doesn't make the story any less engaging. Miles' family dynamics offer some truly heartfelt moments, and his struggle as his two lives start to intertwine is incredibly effective. I felt a lot of the side activities in this game were better than the first one. Everything you did served Miles' story, as opposed to just being there as something to pad out the runtime. Peter's training activities helped enforce that idea of Miles being a hero in training, still honing and discovering his abilities, while the crimes and side missions were all about him connecting with his community and truly becoming a friendly neighbourhood Spider-Man. Even the collectibles strengthened the impact of the story, through developing Miles' relationships with others. Plus, there is a post-game final mission that is so movingly brilliant. Safe to say then that Spider-Man Miles Morales is a true top quality game, proving once and for all that you don't have to have a massive sprawling sequel to experience something greater. This is it, my number one game of 2020. Ghost of Tsushima absolutely surprised and thrilled me. I had no intention of even picking it up until maybe a month before release. I'd seen the odd trailer here and there, but it wasn't until it received its own state of play presentation that my interest was piqued. Watching that video, the world just looked so different to any other open world game I'd played before. It seemed somehow alive. Then, once I finally received the game, it didn't take long until I was hooked. All my suspicions were immediately confirmed. In Ghost of Tsushima, the world isn't just something for you to traverse, a means to an end of getting from point A to point B. It feels almost like its own character. The way the wind guides you to your next destination, as though the island itself is urging you to defeat the Mongol invaders, is an inspired design choice. The game could have so very easily been bogged down by the brutal nature of its story, but instead it's the quieter moments where Ghost of Tsushima shines brightest. The haikus scattered about the island offer quiet moments of reflection. Important character moments are enriched by the sheer beauty of the open world, and when you see the opening titles for the first time, just prepare to be amazed. It's not just that Tsushima is amazing to look at. The way the world has been crafted removes a lot of the slog many open world games can fall into. You're not presented with a myriad of points of interest the second you open the map. Instead, the collectibles you find naturally as you journey across the island. Instead of a quest marker, when near something, a golden bird will appear in the sky, guiding you to a hidden secret. It emphasises the reliance on nature and further enforces that notion of the island willing you to prevail. The vast majority of the side quests too are deep and meaningful. If they're not delving into the often mysterious and harrowing stories of your allies, they're further enriching the world of Tsushima as you meet the residents fighting for survival. The character-specific quests offered some of the most enriching stories from a side quest I've experienced in quite some time, and complement the main story perfectly. Let's talk about that main story for a moment too, because wow is it a good one. I often find that the story in games like these leave a lot to be desired. You're often sent off on a grand quest to save someone or something, and then spend 80 hours scavenging mushrooms so NPC number 281 can have soup for their lunch. In Ghost of Tsushima, however, everything you do serves the main story. Every side quest has some tie to the Mongol invasion, and with each one you clear you truly feel as though you're liberating the island bit by bit. It makes the curveballs the story throws at you all the more powerful. This game has some truly powerful moments, and I can easily state it's one of the best stories I've ever experienced across any medium. I've come this far without even mentioning how the gameplay feels. That's how good this game is. Well, I'm sure you can guess by this point that it doesn't disappoint. Ghost of Tsushima truly makes you feel like a samurai. The combat is smooth and effective, the different techniques you learn as you progress through the game sincerely aiding your technique, and the stealth options really make you strategize how you take on your enemies. Stealth is a huge part of this game. For most games it's just another option if you don't like rushing in guns blazing, but in Ghost it's integral to the story. That's not to say it's forced on you by any means. If anything, the game spends too much time chastising you for employing stealth, but it's at least somewhat understandable given the story context. I imagine I could quite happily go on and on about Tsushima for hours. It truly is a remarkable accomplishment. Often you find when a console is reaching the end of its life cycle, all the big tentpole releases are a thing of the past, pushed to shiny and newer hardware. Sony opted not to do this for the PlayStation 4, instead choosing to release one of its best ever games mere months before the PS5 released. Ghost of Tsushima was truly awesome to experience, and for me at least, might just be a defining game of the generation. So, those are my top 5 favourite games of 2020. Each one of them impacted me in different ways and all deserve their place at the top of any Game of the Year list. There were plenty of games I didn't play this year that I certainly want to get around to. The hype surrounding Hades has me intrigued, and another indie darling, Spiritfarer, sounds right up my alley. However, out of those others I did play, honourable mentions have to go to Super Mario 3D All-Stars, Pokemon Mystery Dungeon DX, Immortals Phoenix Rising, and Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. All were fantastic games in their own right, and further prove how exciting this year has been. 2020 was an incredible year for video games, and seeing what's in the pipeline, I have no reason to suspect 2021 will be any different. The PS5 looks set to enjoy a bumper first year on the market, Xbox is doing some great stuff with Games Pass, and I've no doubt Nintendo will do as it always does and surprise and charm the heck out of us all. It's been a crazy year and we've still got a ways to go, but now more than ever, millions of us are experiencing the power of video games, and I look forward to seeing what excitement they bring us all in the year to come. Thank you so much for watching, now let's go enjoy some games.